The emerging technology of geoengineering has existed since the early 1970s. Its scope and implementations have been dramatically reshaped in recent years. A distinguished process within the geoengineering realm is dubbed cloud seeding, wherein chemical or biological agents are intentionally injected into clouds via aircraft to alter the precipitation that falls from the victimized cloud. The aura of conspiratorial claims that encompass geoengineering activity radiate around the notion of chemtrails, the governmental ploy for weather manipulation through the scientific phenomenon of contrails to release ulterior substances into the atmosphere and potentially weed out the sick and elderly. In 1996, roughly 20 years since the advent of geoengineering, a document was released on behalf of the U.S. Department of Defense entitled Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. The report highlighted the operational capabilities of geoengineering tactics consisting of storm enhancement, precipitation denial, and cloud removal. The conspiracy theory caught fire. The United States Air Force was purported to have sprayed the U.S. population with unknown substances. But before we substantiate this claim with rational and scientific certainty, let's examine the process of contrail origination. When an aircraft travels through the atmosphere, hot air is emitted from its jet engine. That hot air is fused with water vapor, a byproduct of the jet's exhaust, and combines with humid, cold air, resulting in the formation of condensation trails or contrails. Homer Newell, an associative administrator of NASA, validates the weather modification theory in his A Recommended National Program in Weather Modification report. He admits, over the past 20 years, experiments have been conducted on weather modification, particularly on the effects of seeding clouds with such materials as silver iodide crystals. So why, if the chronic inhalation of silver iodide triggers bluish discoloration of the skin, are civilians so willing to allow governmental reign over global weather control? Because the government can augment water supplies, reduce lightning, suppress hail, mitigate tornadoes, and inhibit the full development of hurricanes through cloud seeding techniques. But at what cost? Before emotions dictate our thoughts, let's establish a logical and definitive distinction between contrails, persistent contrails, and chemtrails. Contrails, as vindicated by the U.S. Air Force, are vapor trails composed of water that usually dissipate very rapidly. On the other hand, persistent contrails are formed under conditions of high humidity and can last for hours. However, chemtrails are unmistakably different than any other type of cloud. Let's reference NASA's Appleman chart, for it scientifically disproves refutations to the chemtrail conspiracy. According to the chart, contrails cannot form above -35 degrees Celsius, and persistent contrails cannot form above -40 degrees Celsius. Albeit, U.S. Air Force documentation contradicts this factual information by remarking, there are some specific uses of commercial, private, and military aviation where chemicals are introduced into the atmosphere, typically performed at low altitudes. If this testimony, issued by the military-industrial complex, is legitimate, then how can persistent contrails materialize at such low altitudes and high temperatures, conflict with the necessary parameters that produce a persistent contrail, and last longer than a few hours? They're not persistent contrails. They're chemtrails. What are these crazed conspiracy kooks stressing over? The government has our best interest at heart. They wouldn't hurt us. Wrong. Environmentalists consent that chemtrails pollute the sky due to their composition of barium, magnesium, and aluminum, which collectively reflect the sun's heat, causing the entrapment of gases or the global warming theory. While geoengineering and weather manipulation are often justified as the combatant force to global warming and ozone depletion, the EPA attributes CO2, an element whose solid form of dry ice is used in cloud seeding, to the exacerbation of global warming. That said, the government allegedly counteracts the pollution of CO2 emissions by counterintuitively dumping additional harmful substances into the atmosphere. These responsible elitists even go to the extent of disavowing the term chemtrail in their Air Force literature. There is no such thing as a chemtrail. Contrails are safe and are a natural phenomenon. They pose no health hazard of any kind. Perhaps then it's coincidental that in the spring of 1998 in Ontario, Canada, concentrations of aluminum powder were discovered in rainwater from consistent months of cloud seeding experimentations overhead. Innocent and diverse, these Canadian civilians were poisoned by these dense deposits of aluminum, manifested through severe headaches, chronic joint pain, dizziness, extreme fatigue, and asthma attacks. Released to the Belfort Group in 2010, Case Orange was an extensive report compiled to debunk the weather manipulation programs conducted by the US and its allies, and to nullify the concrete science behind contrails. Though the manipulation of climate through the modification of cirrus clouds is fully operational, according to Case Orange, it is dismissed as another internet-driven conspiracy theory. The report also declares the heat energy may be re-radiated out into space, thus reducing global warming due to the greenhouse effect, implying the revelation of new life in the global warming scare. Yet, the method of cloud seeding necessitates the implementation of carbon dioxide. So, how will the reintroduction of the elements that supposedly arouse the global warming hoax remedy the issue? What caused the remarkable temperature increase during the Ice Age? Fossil fuels? Of course. There are two primary instruments utilized throughout the geoengineering approach: the aforementioned cloud seeding technique and ionospheric heaters. Several of these ionospheric heaters are scattered across the globe, such as the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico and the Sora facility in Russia. Yet the most prominent complex, HARP, sits shrouded in the forests of Gakona, Alaska. HARP, or High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, is actively funded by the US Air Force and Navy and exhibits the operational capacity to heat up the ionosphere. When man is authorized to manipulate the weather, the probabilities of problematic economical facets become abounding. Likewise, HARP is capable of inducing droughts by emitting ionospheric microwaves. Crop failure and farm wars arise. To retain an income, farmers are forced to purchase GMO aggregate Monsanto's drought-resistant seeds. Government procured problem, government procured monopoly. Closely intertwined with HARP, Project Cloverleaf is an ongoing joint military operation between the United States and Canada to reduce the effects of global warming. Again, a paradox is formulated. Chemicals such as barium are released and absorbed through electromagnetic radiation emissions created from HARP, resulting in the obstruction of UV rays into the atmosphere. Crop deficiency, corruption, Monsanto, money. Also, HARP's website confesses that government scientists are conducting research at HARP, and coincidentally, military refueling tankers are used to release chemicals via Project Cloverleaf. In accord with any crime, the eminent inquiry resounds. What were the motives? First and foremost, The implementations of geoengineering on the scale of aerosol weather modification would reduce the political pressure for emission reduction. Otherwise, the military-industrial complex would be eagerly poised to capitalize on controlling the weather, as well as advancing their warfare techniques while stimulating economic dominance over the agricultural industry. The government would propagandize the fallacy that they had blocked UV rays from entering the atmosphere to halt global warming, when, realistically, through cloud seeding, they induced droughts upon farms to garner revenue for Monsanto, aka themselves. Beyond the probable hypotheticals, what aspects of society could the government employ these geoengineering technologies upon? According to military documentation, hurricane redirection, massive flooding, fog and cloud removal, and precipitation enhancement and denial. While some intervention tools exist today, others may be developed and refined in the future. I've discovered a lot throughout this past research that I've conducted on geoengineering, and hopefully I've presented it to you in the most logical and organized form possible. But if you still have some unanswered questions, please consult the sources in the description of this video below, or simply consult your own. Realize that this isn't some fantastical narrative that I've articulated to you, it is reality. Remember that we are being sprayed and power is knowledge. In liberty and vigilance, my friends, Andrew Demeter, signing off.